The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pion. I'm Sara Pion, your host, and today I'm so excited because I have the author of one of my favorite books, The Cannabis Health Index, author Uwe Blesching. Welcome, Uwe. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Sara. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, because I want to talk about your latest projects, which are very exciting. But I always like to start with my guests with, what was your first cannabis experience?
Well, thinking back, I was still living in Germany, and I came to the States when I was 23. So I think I was a young adult, and a friend introduced me. She had brought some hash. And at first I was a bit skeptical because I was still socialized with the narrative on the war on drugs. I was a bit cautious, but she convinced me to give it a shot, to give it a try, and it was just a very delightful experience of spending about an hour with the giggles and the munchies and having, a really good time connecting in ways that we hadn't connected before. And so that always stood with me as a beacon in the back of my memory in terms of how I made first contact.
Yeah. When you got to the States, what was your impression of cannabis when you got to the States?
Well, when I came, most of my friends were, ex-hippies, and so they had a pretty, easygoing relationship with the plant, and not just with cannabis, but with most of the psychotropic plants, and so I kind of easily fell into that crowd, into that mindset, into that perspective, but I also was working in the medical field, and and I would used to judge the quality of a substance or a drug, may it be recreational or otherwise, by the type of 911 calls it generated. And in the about 20 years that I worked as a paramedic and a fireman for the city and county of San Francisco, I've never come across a call that was generated based on the use of cannabis alone. And so it's always been, an ally in terms of making connections, an ally in terms of embracing perspectives of wonder and adventure. And then little by little, it added a whole other dimension, and that is the area of its medicinal use and medicinal purposes. And so overall, it's been a really interesting connection, and that is still evolving and has been evolving for since my first experience so many years ago.
So, Uwe, I was thinking about when you're talking about your background as a fireman and paramedic, and then you mentioned medical cannabis, and that's like that's the realm in which I know you. And so, how did you make that jump into medical cannabis, and what inspired you to write the Cannabis Health Index?
Well, thanks for asking that question. When you're in the medical field, sooner or later, everybody that friends or family, are going to ask you for, well, do you think, of a treatment for this particular condition, or do you think cannabis can potentially help with this, or it can help with this ailment that I'm challenged with? And so I would then actually look it up, sort of as a favor to a friend, and I would look up, okay, so you have an issue with glaucoma. So let me look up what the studies, what the science is behind it, what the evidence actually is for glaucoma, and and then 3 months later somebody else would ask me about something else, and then after a while I would forget the information that I had collected the last time around, and so I started taking notes. So I'm making my notes here for glaucoma, if you will, and then my notes for hypertension. And then little by little, I was really surprised at that ever-growing list of conditions for which cannabis or cannabinoid-based therapeutics show potential. And I was like, oh, my God, check this out. And so that list, those notes became the basic structure for the Cannabis Health Index, which literally, takes a look at this vast repository of studies and trials and data that is out there, and then lines them up to the various conditions, and most of them chronic conditions, for which cannabis shows promise. And one of the things that I noticed was really interesting is because most of these conditions for which cannabis shows promise are actually considered chronic conditions by the Orthodox medical tradition. That is, conditions that for which there is no cure, but then a means or a way of modulating the disease with pharmaceuticals or means to reduce the symptoms. But for many of these conditions in the Western system, in the Orthodox system of medicine, there is no actual cure, but an ongoing management of symptoms. And so that was an interesting element that came out of these initial notes. And one of the things I treasure the most is that because bringing cannabis into the picture not just helps reducing symptoms, but actually modulate the disease process in many ways. And in that sense, opens up, the door of hope a little bit more for so many different patient populations for which otherwise there would be none. And so that alone, I think, is a wonderful service that the plant brings to the collective. The collective a group of people in need of healing.
Yeah, I have to say, when I have your book, of course, I have the first and second edition sitting here in my bookcase. But one thing that I was really taken with, because I have a lot of different books on cannabis education, being an educator, is your unique approach to it, because you have a more holistic approach in your book. And I wonder if you'd speak more to that, because you definitely talk about mindfulness and just like some more around the body-mind connection than most books do, because most of them just put out, this cannabinoid does this terpene does this, and then they make some vague proclamations around certain cultivars. But yours is very different than that, and I was wondering if you could dig into that a little bit for us.
Sure, I'd love to. In the 10-plus years that I've been doing research and writing in and about the cannabinoid health sciences, I've come to believe that the reason why cannabis works so well for so many different patient populations is because it affects the body and the mind in such a way as to support the body's capacity for self-healing. And it does so primarily in two different ways. One, the right type of cannabis, given at the right dose, matched to each individual needs of each patient, will induce, one, a deep sense of relaxation, and two, it will produce multiple system homeostasis or balance at a cellular level. And when those qualities click in to place, one of the things that happens that gets addressed is there are three very common underlying pathologies that most chronic conditions share. And when cannabis clicks in, these three primary areas are being diminished, are being balanced, are being shifted, and they have to do with inflammation, oxidative stress, and chronic pain. Those are the three common denominators to most chronic conditions, and the right type of cannabis given at the right dose, matched to each individual patient's needs, will address each and every one of those components, and that is one of the reasons. The other one is, of course, it affects the mind, and when we're in a stressed state, the healing process, is challenged with more obstacles than when we are in a relaxed state. That's why a lot of healing happens at night when we're sleeping. Or that's why, for instance, when we are, studies have shown, let me give you an example. One of the patient populations that is new to cannabis and it's rapidly growing are senior citizens. And seniors, many of us seniors are informed by the narrative on the war on drugs. And so when they go to the doctor's office, they come with trepidation, they come with stress, they come with fears or anxieties about this plant that they have been taught, to fear as the evil wheat from Mexico. And so they have come with concerns. Now, like I said, studies have shown that when we are in a stressed state, our pain threshold goes up. And when we are, in a stress state, the pain threshold goes down. And so the experience of pain is worsened by stress, fear, and anxiety. The same is true if we feel relaxed, if we feel, a sense of trust. And so reassuring a senior, considering using cannabis, it goes a big deal into the direction of using the impact of the mind in actually being able to reduce the experience of pain itself. And cannabis or endocannabinoids, it's not just the plant cannabis that helps with that, but the body makes its own version of cannabis, and one of its purposes is to address these three things: the chronic pain, the inflammation, and the oxidative stress. If we have too much stress, if we, in a constant state of fear or anxiety, like, for example, not just patients with PTSD, but in this time and age of COVID, we all have more stress and anxiety these days, and so that affects our endocannabinoid tone, our capacity to make enough endocannabinoids to produce these therapeutic effects that bring about the resilience that is necessary to fight off an infection, may it be a cold or whatever, that put us into a place where we're able to mitigate the symptoms naturally, that whatever it is that we're dealing with. And so it goes a long way to reduce the contributing factors that are so commonplace with chronic conditions. And so in that sense, it's wonderful to see what the plant can do and what the human body itself can do. And the mind-body connection is that bridge between the mind's impact on the body's capacity to regenerate. It's a two-way street. If you change the way you feel, you change your chemistry, and if you change your chemistry, you change the way you feel. And there are a great number of other examples to talk about, in terms of neurotransmitters or hormones that have emotional correlates, on how using cannabis or working with the endocannabinoid system can help mitigate moods that are conducive to healing and reducing moods that are not conducive to healing, that bring about more stress. And so it's always been a really fascinating topic to explore both the physiological aspects of dealing with cannabinoids, with endocannabinoids, and its impact on the mind and how that all interplays with each other.
Yeah, especially when you think about too effects on the individual, because we are walking chemistry experiments, being so different with our chemical balances. And when you take in, like, even one of the things that I've noticed has been really, how would you say, just impactful on a person's cannabis experiences, neurodiversity, right?
Mm.
And when, especially when, when I teach my classes, and I'll talk about, I still will use the terminology indica and sativa, although, as we know, it's more about the chemotypes than that, because that's really just, it's almost like a placeholder for describing the spectrum of feel. But when I work with certain people who have things like, who have ADD or ADHD, things that are a little bit more uplifting and stimulating for other people create homeostasis for them. And then looking at, like, just even like when you were mentioning the pandemic, this year with everything that everybody's been going through and cannabis being considered an essential business in California, it's been an opportunity for a lot of people to finally kind of dip their toe in the pool and see how it affects their bodies. Because a class that I've been doing regularly throughout the year has been one on anxiety, depression, and sleep. And I went from, having maybe like 25 people in class to having 200 this year. And it's like, whoa, everybody needs something. Like, and people are striving, like, we have that human desire, whether we realize it or not, like striving for homeostasis. And this year in particular, a lot of people have been, going towards cannabis. But I always like to mention to people too, even though we do create our own cannabinoids in our bodies, that not everybody, there are people who can't metabolize phytocannabinoids. And what are your thoughts around that?
Well, there's a lot of points you just made that are worth discussion. And, this is a stressful time, and stress is an acknowledged contributor to lowering resistance and to being more vulnerable to developing a condition, and so the endocannabinoid deficiency or endocannabinoid tone are two concepts that are beginning to explore some of the questions or some of the concerns that you've raised. Like, for example, patients who are under chronic stress, they may have developed an endocannabinoid deficiency, or the endocannabinoid tone has been thrown out of balance, and that's why their resilience has diminished and why they're becoming more vulnerable to disease. Now, it's also interesting that mindfulness practices, anything from moving meditation such as Tai Chi or emotional processing, so that people don't get weighed down by 10 decades worth of emotional luggage that they lug around that is keeping them in a depressed or anxious state, and so all of these things play a role, and it's becoming more and more clear that the cannabinoids that the human body makes itself can be depleted, and in that sense, it can keep the body from developing the balance or homeostasis that healthier people, have at their disposal. And so in some cases, we can use phytocannabinoids, plant-based cannabinoids, primarily cannabis, to see if that can make a difference. Now, cannabinoids or cannabis, or different types of cannabis, can affect different types of people in different ways. And one of the most common misconceptions that people that are new to cannabis have is thinking that one type of cannabis is cannabis. And that's the fallacy that underlies that assumption is the same thing as going to a pharmacy and thinking, all of these pills on the shelf are pills, and so therefore pills are good for me. My doctor has prescribed me a pill. But we know, of course, everybody knows that each pill has a clearly defined purpose, and not everybody can use any pill expecting, positive results. And while it may be an extreme example, there are so many different types of cannabis that can affect so many different patients differently. It really helps to narrow down what plant constituents are going to be optimal for each person. And while you can certainly experiment and find out, the science has now advanced enough for us to make some broad distinctions about which cannabis chemotypes are optimal for what for what patient populations. And in a nutshell, there are three basic chemotypes that are currently defined. Chemotype 1 simply means it contains more THC than CBD. Chemotype 2 is roughly equal THC to CBD, and typically, for all intent and purpose, anything between 4:1 and 1:4 it falls into this category. And then chemotype 3 simply has a lot more CBD than THC. Now, to give you but one example from Western medicine, each of these chemotypes is represented by a pharmaceutical version of it, or analog. That means a similar pharmaceutical product that is equal to or very similar to a chemotype. For instance, dronabinol or marinol is a THC-only product, which is an analog to a chemotype 1, and it's indicated for, let's say, nausea and vomiting that's secondary to chemotherapy treatments, or it's been employed effectively in the treatment of anorexia and cachexia in people with HIV and AIDS. And so those are clear distinction where cannabis chemotype 1 with more THC is the optimal starting point to fine tune what is right for you. Now, when we look at the chemotype 1, the literature lights up around conditions such as multiple sclerosis, for example. And there you have nabiximols or Sativex, which is a pharmaceutical version, an extract of 1:1 chemotype 2, roughly equal amounts of THC to CBD. And then, of course, we have Epidiolex or Pediolex, which is primarily used to treat pediatric seizure disorders that are refractory to standard anti-epileptic treatments. And so those are clear distinctions of where the science is now pointing to the evidence of where specific chemotypes are considered optimal. And, you can, of course, talk about strains. A Charlotte's Web, for example, is an example of a chemotype 3. And, using a Charlotte's Web, of course, making your own extract is going to be so much less expensive than using, a $20,000 a year supply of the pharmaceutical version of this. And the same is true for the other pharmaceutical preparations. They're easily done making your own medicine or using flowers that depict that ratio, that contain that ratio. And so when it comes to the distinction in the past, because the science wasn't there, and because breeders and seed producers and growers often talk in terms of hybrids and sativas and indicas, the proposed qualities that were typically associated with the strains, the sativa, indica, or hybrid strains, were generally broad. But if you want precision, if you want medical precision and predictability of effects, you need to step away from the sativa and indica distinction, for the most part, and embrace a prescribing by the numbers of the individual plant constituents that have shown efficacy for the different patient populations. And that is a very exciting new aspect that is emerging out of the especially the latest sciences, where researchers are testing the different chemotypes in the same patient populations. And over time, that will give us a lot more clinical guidance in terms of where to start, what type of cannabis pill or tincture to use for what condition. And, still, cannabis will never be a silver bullet. It's like everybody with hypertension should take this. It's always going to take a bit of titrating the individual constituents that are going to work best for each patient, even though, the science points to this chemotype as a good starting point. And that is why cannabis education or educators such as yourself are so important, to bring this information and bring this data, to people, because the more we know about the cannabis constituents that are optimal for each of us, the more we are able to stay on that fine line, that fine dividing line between a therapeutic effect and an adverse effect. And so with that in mind, I think that addresses some of the questions you were raising just before I started this
yes.
This long
that was so valuable. And just like when you were talking about the pharmaceuticals, I was also reflecting on when I was going through my treatment for a stage 3 cancer. I was colon cancer. And I was here in San Francisco getting chemo every other week, and my mom was doing cancer research in Dallas at Baylor. She actually did the clinical trials of the chemo that I ended up using years later, which was, that's a whole other story. But
wow.
It's like kind of a full circle thing. But I was using cannabis for symptom management during my treatment because I wanted to avoid as much as possible using opiates and my anti-anxiety drugs, just due to the fact that one of those side effects is constipation, and that can create sepsis for people who are going through colon cancer. And so I didn't want to travel with my cannabis on a plane, and I got a prescription for Marinol from my oncologist, and I brought it to Texas. Actually, I filled it in Texas. He called it into Texas, so I didn't even have to travel with that. And one of the things that I noticed was that it actually did almost the opposite of what it was supposed to do. It actually made me feel kind of nauseated, and I was groggy. And to be quite honest, excuse my language, I was a little bitchy. It was like, I lost my weekend with my mom. And that was, something I reflected on later when I started to delve more into the science around the importance of, and I think, this is something where like, there's just a certain amount of hubris, I think, with some research with isolating cannabinoids and saying, this is the active ingredient, so we're going to use this. And it's like, well, yes, and like there are other components in there that you're looking at, not, considering less active. But like our colleague Mara Gordon talks about, the fact of like full spectrum cannabis by and large is much more effective than isolating any certain cannabinoid. And then also, and that's kind of the thing I was wondering when you were talking about like the chemotypes of cannabis, like how are we taking into consideration things like lesser cannabinoids and terpene profiles and things like that?
Wonderful question. I fully come down on the side with Mara, but not just with Mara and with you on this, that full spectrum cannabis use is optimal compared to isolates. But, the science also says that, when you look at side-by-side comparison trials, looking at isolates or synthetic cannabinoids compared to the impact that a full spectrum product will bring, it always becomes clear that you need actual less amounts of cannabinoids to get the same effect, and at the same time creating an entourage effect that also reduces the threshold for developing adverse effects. And so it's an all-around win. It's a financial savings, and it packs a deeper punch as far as generating therapeutic effects lasting longer at the same time. And so while those trials where they use isolates, and while some people really benefit from isolates, I don't want to take that away from them. If they have something that works for them, and it happens to be an isolate, wonderful. There's room for that. But if it be me, or if it's somebody that I care about, my advice, I would definitely point them to using a full spectrum product. And the entourage effect is the synergy is another way people talk about it. It's where numerous plant constituents create an effect that's larger than the sum of its components, and in that sense amplifies the therapeutic potential that one is looking for. And so the acid forms combined with some of the already carboxylated cannabinoids, combining it with very specific terpenes, where the evidence is clearly not just anecdotal evidence, but scientific evidence says, if you combine THC and myrcene, you will have an increased sedative effect, which you want to harness if you're dealing with withdrawal symptoms from opioids, for example, which you want to avoid if you're very sensitive to THC, and or there is a potential for developing psychosis. You want to be extremely careful, with using THC and myrcene in combination, just because it amplifies that sedative effect. While it's conscious sedation, it's still, to people who are very sensitive, can affect their mood, can actually make nausea and vomiting worse, can make them bitchy, like you said. And so yes, while certain cannabis constituents can induce therapeutic effects in one group of people, in others it can make them worse. And most of those things, though, are THC dose dependent. And that is a fairly good thing, because it's a good rule of thumb to use. So for people who are concerned, or people who had bad experiences, they most certainly ought to start by dialing down the THC dose or concentration, and shifting to a cannabis chemotype, 3 or 2 with only small or trace amount of THC, and then see if that type of cannabis works for them. And if it doesn't, they can always dial in very gently, the THC amounts and the terpenes that have shown to amplify or diminish the impact of THC. And so full spectrum is the way to go, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's always so eye-opening to be able to look at like the different ratios and makeups, and just kind of see how it resonates for individuals. But this is also an excellent point in time to talk about your newest book, which I'm extremely excited about, because I can't tell you how many times people look at me completely perplexed when they face CBD ratios.
Right. Yeah, it's the CBD to THC ratios are in my opinion one of the most fruitful, most fertile areas of exploration to determine optimal outcomes and predictability of effects. And when it comes to cannabis, one of the reasons why you'll never be a silver bullet is because there are a number of things you can't predict or control when it comes to utilizing cannabis-based medicines. For example, if you're inhaling something, you can never really know how much of the active ingredients are lost to the atmosphere. You can't control how much and how quickly it's absorbed across the blood-brain barrier, for example. Different folks, even within the same patient population, have a different endocannabinoid tone and different endocannabinoid deficiency, a different sensitivity to especially THC. And so those things we can control. And that's why a little bit of fine-tuning, of titrating cannabis constituents is always going to be part of optimizing the treatment regimen. But there are a number of things that we can control, that we can employ to facilitate therapeutic effect, to mitigate the risk of adverse effects potential, and to optimize the healing potential that can be there. And that starts out with broadly deciding or determining what is the optimal cannabis chemotype as a starting point. And so is it more equal or is it less THC than CBD? And we already, highlighted those some of the key elements. And that's the first step. That's the broadest step one can use in order to make more informed and discerning decisions. Like, for example, if somebody is concerned about the addiction potential of cannabis, or about the adverse effects potential of cannabis, both of those big concerns are primarily THC dose dependent. And so just shifting to a cannabis chemotype 3, like a Charlotte's Web or an Epidiolex product, for example, or a tincture that's a 20-1 or even 20-0, containing mostly CBD. All of those concerns are virtually instantly mitigated by choosing that type of product. And then if it turns out that it doesn't give you as much symptom reduction or modulation of your disease process that you're dealing with, then you can always dial in a little bit more THC over time, which brings us to the next step that we can control, and that is the sub-ratio of THC to CBD. So I like to use the basketball court analogy. If you play a one-on-one, the odds are pretty even. If you play a 1-on-2, a 1-on-5, a 1-on-20, it's a very, very different picture. And it's very similar in terms of the parts of THC to parts of CBD. And so the ratio determines the often calming effects or that CBD brings to the sometimes harshness of THC. And vice versa. And THC can also amplify some of the therapeutic effects of CBD, but they tend to be very patient-specific. But the sub-ratio is the second step we can control. I can buy a tincture that's a 1-5, or I can buy one that's 1-20. And those numbers are wonderful to play with and dial in the optimal constituents that are going to be working best for you. And then, of course, the third step we control is the actual dosage. What is the milligram amount of THC, of CBD, or other plant constituents? And then, of course, the next controllable step is looking at the different forms. When you're inhaling a cannabinoid-based therapeutic, it tends to produce very different effects in terms of onset and duration and intensity than if you're utilizing an inhalation or a topical, or you're using it as suppository or some of the other forms that are certainly available. And so step 5, if you will, of the 6 things that we can control that generate the predictability of effects has to do with engaging the entourage effect. And that is where we want to bring in, certain acid forms, certain synergy-producing terpenes or flavonoids and there's a fascinating amount of data out there that we can pull and lean on in order to make significantly more informed and discerning decisions to fine-tune our healing regimen. And then lastly, and perhaps the most important step, is to keep a session log. And when you keep a session log and one thing did or did not work for you, you want to make one change at a time. And the session log will help you keep track of it. So if you switch a chemotype, that let's say you started out with a chemotype 1 and you got anxious or more nauseous than you wanted to be, you might want to switch to a chemotype 2. So you keep track in the session log, and you write a few notes about the experience. And within a few days, keeping a session log, knowing exactly what change produced what change in your symptoms or in your, in the way the cannabis experience unfolded with you, that is how you're going to check in with your inner core, with that's where you activate the mind-body bridge. This is where your engagement with the plant ally that cannabis can truly be. You can bring it to the conscious fore, to the conscious forefront. And many times some people report wonderful insights as they pay attention to making subtle shifts on the outside and how they respond to it. There are connections that are being made that can be part and parcel of a deeper healing process. And in that sense is why I'm believing that perhaps the most important step is to becoming more mindful, and a session log can certainly help with that process.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of those things where I think even when people have come to see me and they're frustrated because they've been experimenting with cannabis, but it's been more or less more of a willy-nilly sort of way of trying things. And recording your impressions is not only valuable for capturing the information about how you're personally metabolizing cannabis, but I think that the exercise in itself is a good tool for grounding and mindfulness about everything we put in our bodies. And just like looking at setting expectations for that experimentation process, one of the things that I say to people, and this is I'm preaching to the choir. It's exactly what you just said, is, talking about giving them a goal. The goal is to find the appropriate ratio at the lowest volume possible that creates the desired reaction in the body, but also that if your first set of experimentations with ratios and volume aren't giving you what you're looking for, you're still capturing really important information about how you personally metabolize cannabis. And so it's not a wasted effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No. In fact, you're addressing, the two terms, pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics of cannabis, and they differ. They differ depending on plant constituents, and of course they differ in terms of how your body responds to it. And in a way, it's that suggestion or that process is a very self-empowering task to engage in, because it allows you to see how working with the exterior numbers of the constituents produce the very shifts in symptoms and in the way you feel and the way your cognition works and how that works for you. And that is, that awareness building can be a very empowering tool, as many of the people that bring mind-body medicine to their healing process have discovered. And so the first step is that awareness and making that connection of how I shift one of these five steps before this session log will produce a different set of responses, within me, but also the attention that I bring to noticing that shift is where the mindfulness can facilitate the empowerment that can deepen the healing process.
Yeah. I want to shift a little because I want to geek out with you on your newest project, which, well, I'll say newest because this is the only newest one that I know since the last time we spoke, because I know you always have a lot of irons in the fire, but this is a little bit of a higher level project where Canna-Keys, because I've had the opportunity to talk to people who have developed apps for cannabis usage, cannabis information, and by and large, if I may be so candid, I haven't been very appreciative of them, especially because by and large, it's been people coming from the tech field without any real knowledge of cannabis and how it works. And so they're just kind of plugging things together. Whereas when I looked at your project, it was just much more in depth and educational, and there's real substance to it. I was very impressed by what I saw. But for our listeners, if you could explain to them what Canna-Keys is and how it works.
Sure. Canna-Keys was developed. We started about 4 years ago when Douglas Reel and David Rosenthal, the tech guy, the three of us got together, and Doug was the publisher of the company that published the Cannabis Health Index. That's how we know each other. And we were talking about the Cannabis Health Index and the rapid growth of the scientific literature. I mean, I don't know if you looked or how frequently you visit PubMed or some of the other repositories that are out there. The rate by which cannabinoid-based studies are published is roughly about 10 studies a day that get added to the collective knowledge that we have at our disposal. Now, the problem with that is that the studies are not they are not structured in such a way that they make for an easy distillation of the data that's most relevant to an individual patient, or to even an educator such as yourself or a healthcare provider, like a nurse or a physician. And so in a way, the Cannabis Health Index was designed to give policymakers and healthcare providers to give them the data that they need to make more informed and discerning decisions about what conditions cannabis can be used for, and what's the evidence and what type of evidence, and in that sense, how trusting can we be of that evidence. And so while I still love working in publishing and writing, physical paper, I still like to hold a book and read and learn that way. But because of the rapid growth of the cannabinoid health sciences, we thought that it would be really helpful and practical to create an online version, a platform that's similar to the Cannabis Health Index, lines up all the available scientific literature that's associated with a particular condition, but in such a way that it's pre-digested and already pulls out all the relevant data in such a way that you can glance at a dashboard of a particular condition and see instantly how many clinical trials were conducted, how many preclinical trials, with the synopsis that highlights the key points that make a significant difference in terms of saving time for an educator or for a prescribing healthcare person to utilize the currently available data in the most efficacious way to access that data, to make that process of learning about what cannabis types are considered optimal for what condition so that it's not a struggle. So it's not like I have to spend 6 hours of reviewing, a number of the latest studies that were published since last I checked. And so in that sense, that's what we wanted to create with CannaKeys, a real-life meta-analysis of the data that's available, but distilled down so that individual patients or their providers have the most important data at their fingertips. In a way, put us all at the same page in terms of this is what the data says. In this case, yes, it works. In this case, no, it makes it worse. Or in this case, this cannabis chemotype works, but it doesn't work for all patients, and here's why. And so to bring nuance and complexity to an otherwise complicated process, to make it easier to make really evidence-based and decisions about how to utilize the science to facilitate the best possible healing regimen that can be had. And so that was the idea behind it, and we just launched about 4 months ago, so it's fairly new, and we're working to update and expand on the platform to give people the tools that they need in order to achieve the goals that they've set for themselves, either as providers or as patients. And it's been a fun process. In fact, Mara Gordon is on our board of directors, advisory board member, and we're talking quite frequently about how to digest the data out there, in a way to let doctors know about why cannabis works and what the evidence behind it says, and to bring it with the nuance, with a concentrated nuance that facilitates the fastest education that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Do you, for people who are interested in utilizing it, is it a subscription-based service?
It's a subscription-based service. That's right. I mean, you can go on cannakeys.com and do, you get a free week to play around on it and see if it is a tool that is exciting to you and inspiring to you, and a time-saving tool, and helps you become a better provider. And if that's what it does, then subscribe. And if not, you can just play around with it and access some of the free portions, and you just play with it at a more superficial level. But either way, it will give you, it will provide you with some context that you may have not been able to arrive at without it.
Yeah, I love that. I just think that the more materials we have for people to be able to refer to, because everybody learns in different ways. Some people like to do their own research. Some people like to have interface with the human being to have the conversations, but we have to have as many ways as possible for people to learn. And just the way that the program itself disseminates the research is a huge help, because for myself, like, I'm always combing through research, and I think it's easier for me because I come from a research background, so I'm used to like going through all that stuff.
Yeah, but it can be intimidating if you're not if you don't speak science. It can be intimidating, and
absolutely.
We the thing is, we're not really creating anything new. We're just utilizing the data that's already out there and presenting it in a way that makes it easier to distill the clinical data, to pull out the highlights that are most relevant and most important as far as optimizing a healing regimen is concerned, based on the data that's available. And, and so it not just shows you where the data says, yes, it works, but it also shows you where the holes are, in terms of what still needs to be fleshed out to get a more complete picture. And but it's a fascinating process to see not just the cannabinoid health sciences growing so rapidly, but also how much impact it can have for a patient or for an educator or provider in terms of being able to harness the vast amount of literature that's out there in an elegant fashion, and that is something that is exciting and that I'm proud to be part of.
Yeah, I think that, having that, I mean, and you're right, there are definitely holes in the research too, or I should say, it's always amazing when I talk to somebody who isn't very engaged in cannabis and they're like, oh, well, there isn't enough research yet. And just the fact that you're saying that, there's 10 new pieces of research that come out that are made available every day. And when we're looking at, like, going back to how you were talking about, the Cannabis Health Index, how it helps educate people, but it also, when we're looking at people who are creating policy and stuff, one of the biggest things I think with education being more available is not only educating the public so we have savvy consumers, but also one of my big pushes this year is really having the conversation about the empowerment of the public to be able to affect change on cannabis policy so that we can get things available that we need. Because right now, policy largely consists of who's whispering in ears, state culture, which is incredibly strong, and stigma. And so if we're able to not only educate policymakers, but educate the public so that it's a call to action this year. It's like when people are upset that their favorite products are no longer available, or that cannabis has now become even more expensive than it was before, or their dissatisfaction with how difficult it can be to get into products, especially if they're disabled, having the conversation about, this is don't hate the dispensaries, don't hate the products. Actually, don't hate it all, but do something about it, because
right. That's right. Transcend the constricting emotions that you have about it into action.
Yeah, and let your legislators know that, you're a very highly productive member of society. You pay taxes, you use cannabis, and you vote.
That's right. I use cannabis and I vote.
And I think that the more our policymakers start to see the public, see the people who are keeping them in their jobs, and realizing that, like, their ideas of what a person who uses cannabis looks like is very different, and that their jobs are actually hanging in the balance until they change their mindset on that, I think is a very, very powerful way to make a change in policy.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly.
And after that, what are you excited about in the future? What are you working on?
What I'm excited about is expanding CannaKeys to make it even better than it already is. And one of the things we're doing, we are working with international partners to create a global setting, because it's not just policymakers or healthcare providers or patients in the States that need access to relevant data, in a way that's meaningful and useful. But, there are 197 countries around the world that need the substance and the systems, to make these decisions so that cannabis can become a respected medicine and can become available to the folks that want it and need it, and providing them with an evidence-based platform that they can use to show, hey, here is a list of 250 chronic conditions for which there's clinical evidence that cannabis can make a significant difference, is a useful and powerful tool. And so we've begun to partner with organizations from around the world, like, for example, WeCan in Brazil. We just signed an agreement with them to share and collaborate our educational platforms and bring CannaKeys to the Brazilian physicians and policymakers to make and bring about the change that is so clearly needed and demanded by many of the patients that are suffering from chronic conditions for which there is no cure within the orthodox medical system, and who want access and who want to try and who want to push that door of hope a little further open regarding, do I have to stay on pharmaceutical medications for the rest of my life, or is there a way to utilize cannabis to deepen my healing process? And so it's exciting to see how not just the winds of change are blowing in the states and in the various halls of the federal government, but also how that affects the same parallel positions and and halls of change in other countries around the world. I mean, there are places that I would have never thought would open up to cannabis. I mean, there's places such as Thailand, very strict, now has medicinal cannabis programs. The German government just contracted with a couple of previously very strict sub-Saharan African countries in terms of growing industrial cannabis for medicinal purposes. And so it's wonderful to see how the whole world is beginning to shift and embrace natural medicine and the mind-body potential that is so clearly implicit with it.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Because there is a lot of stigma out there. I was just reading an article about a gentleman who's a United States citizen who had been in Vegas, had used cannabis there, had traveled to Dubai, and ended up having some medical emergency where he had to go into the hospital. And when they did urinalysis, they found THC metabolites in his system. And so now he's being held before he gets tried for possession of cannabis.
Yeah, that is one of those horror stories that sadly still exist in too many ways. And yeah, I am hopeful though, and I do when I see places like Zimbabwe changing from a very harsh, zero tolerance policy to life imprisonment to growing medicinal cannabis. It does give me hope on a global scale. And here's the other thing: is one of the things we track on CannaKeys is where the research is done, what countries engage in what research, and where the highlights of research centers as far as countries are concerned. And you mentioned Dubai, and even places such as Iran, which is arguably a strict country as far as cannabis policy is concerned. A number of really wonderful trials looking at the therapeutic benefits of cannabis or cannabis constituents have been coming out of universities and research institutions in Iran. And so it's always fascinating to see where research is being done, and while there are a few countries where no cannabis research is being done, most of the countries in the world, at least to a degree, have begun to contribute to the collective knowledge of the cannabinoid health sciences, and that is just a hope delivering piece of knowledge I wanted to share.
What are the countries that you're seeing the most research coming out of?
As much as we have research barriers, the United States is one of the top research producing countries in the world. And so Brazil is another one. Israel is another one. The Netherlands is another one. And the UK is another one. But there are also some really, countries that you wouldn't expect, like Czechoslovakia has a fairly large amount of trials being entered. But it's I have to do a search and see which countries have done none of the research. And I think the only one I can think of off the top of my head would be North Korea. South Korea actually has contributed quite a number of studies, but North Korea, I'm pretty sure, has not done any of the research, and that's not surprising.
No, yeah. Fascinating stuff, because it's a lot. It's eye-opening. I mean, you and I take it for granted the vast amount of research that's coming out all the time, but most people have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to PubMed and you punch in cannabis, you'd get in excess of 30,000 individual scientific papers published on a single plant alone. There is no other plant that brings forth this kind of a research excitement in the academic communities or in the industrial research communities as this plant, and it's contagious. And of course in industry it's motivated mostly by profits and profit potentials. But I do am an optimist, and I think even the most hardened capitalist, is going to appreciate the fact that they're working on a plant that is going to make a difference, a potential difference as far as mitigating disease and suffering is concerned.
Yeah, I feel like we're coming full circle, because it's like when I teach my history class, I always talk about the fact that cannabis in human beings, it's widely thought that it's one of the most one of the oldest cultivation relationships, and we're getting back absolutely. To it. Yeah,
we've cultivated, we've co-evolved with cannabis. In fact, endocannabinoid receptors, endo meaning within, canna in the middle section of the word in reference to cannabis, and oid meaning like. If you read it backwards, it means like cannabis within. The body makes its own version of cannabis, and all mammals have an endocannabinoid system, and researchers have traced the origin of the endocannabinoid system, the components of that, hundreds of millions of years back to a specific point in time in the evolutionary process. And so the plant and the versions of the plant within have co-evolved over that period of time, which is a fascinating mystery to ponder. Is there some spiritual design at play? Is it evolution that's purely coincidental? Is it a combination of possibilities in between? It's just fun to ponder.
Yeah, it is. It's and it really, like, even though we don't have exacts on that, it's an interesting thing to think about how we're made for it. And it's fascinating that we've had this. Really, when you think about the years of prohibition in the big picture, it's a small blip compared to the times that we've had.
Exactly.
Yeah, our medicinal and spiritual relationships with it. Wow, we're at our hour. Oh my God. I knew this would happen. always have so much fun talking to you. If our listeners want to reach out to you or follow you or learn more, where should they go?
They should go to cannakeys.com, CANNAKEYS.com. And there's an email link, Uwe@cannakeys.com. And you want to email me, you want to have a question or concern, please let me know. We frequently highlight FAQs, questions that come in, to any of the social media platforms. We answer them, frequently and publish them on Cannakeys as well. And it was a pleasure, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. And for our listeners, if you want to check out Uwe's books, there is Your Cannabis THC Ratio, which is his latest book. And also, please check out the Cannabis Health Index. These are wonderful books. I actually use the CHI for one of my textbooks when I teach. And yeah, I love it.
You know what? You're going to love the new edition.
I am super excited. It's actually on its way to me even as we speak. I'm excited to tear into it and get back to you with, all my questions.
Anytime, and I'll send you a copy.
Oh, thank you so much. And for our listeners out there, if you would like to follow Planted on social media or on our website, we are on Twitter and Instagram is Planted with Sara. Facebook, we are Planted with Sara Pion. Our website is www.plantedwithsara.com. Radio Misfits Network is our parent network. They are wonderful. You really should check out some of the other podcasts that they're on there. We are the only cannabis podcast, but there are other wonderful ones. One of my favorites is The Winemakers. Also, we are at 2 episodes a month, so tune in. You can listen to us on all of your favorite podcast bases. If you get us on Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and Google. So tune in next time for another exciting, interesting conversation. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and it's a crazy world out there. So be good to each other. Take care.